Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today we have our sense maker in residence for the month of March, Michael Smith. And this is an exciting series. It's called, what's it called? An Unsaving, I should know the title for my series is at the Stoa. Something about unsaving the world. Yes, unsaving the world, doing good without burning out. And you know, we've been talking a lot about the meta crisis here at the Stoa and kind of responding to existential risks and suffering risks. And Michael was someone who was in the applied rational community. I think he co-founded CFAR. And so he's in that space that's really considering these things. And we're talking about how burnout was a real thing and kind of how to respond to it. And so this kind of delicious title, Unsaving the World, emerged. And so there's gonna be a 3-part series, and Michael's probably gonna set the frame a little better than I did about this, about how the series is gonna go. We're gonna be here for 90 minutes, and it's a standard Q&A format. Michael's gonna share his ideas, me and him are gonna jam, and then just throw your question in the chat. I'll call on you, unmute yourself, and you can ask your question to Michael. So that being said, Michael, welcome to the Stoa. Good to have you back.
Thanks, it's good to be back. Cool. So I'm going to jump into some context in a moment, but the first thing I would love to do is invite us to feel our bodies. This is a grounding point. So just take a breath. And just take a moment to notice, what does your body feel like right now? Can you feel your toes? As you breathe, can you feel the movement of your shirt? This isn't meant to be a deep meditation. It's just meant to be, oh, right, I have a body. Maybe some kind of emotional sensations or more subtle sensations, like some kind of like tickliness or a readiness or some kind of sensation like that is happening in a place in your body. Or maybe not. Just notice what's there. Maybe toss into the chat just one thing. What is one detail you're noticing about your body, about your bodily experience? And it can also be these subtle experiences, like a kind of itchiness in my chest. Like right now I'm feeling a little bit of a tickle and a readiness at my solar plexus at the bottom of my chest. And so just like some quick thing, what are you noticing? This gives me some sense of where y'all are. Yeah, Laura mentioning excitement about spring. Yeah. We had a minor snowmageddon here in the Pacific Northwest a few weeks ago. So it's nice to see the sun coming out. Cool. So let me see if I can set that a little to the side so I can see as that continues to stream in. So like, go ahead and make sure that you have a chance to say something, to check in, to make sure that you can articulate something in your. So what I'm hoping to do for this session, so part of the reason I want to start with the embodiment is that as we go into this, it's going to be very easy to go into very high cognitive stuff. But there's a lot of reason to think that that's actually part of the challenge that we're all facing. I'm not sure how familiar the ideas are of Ian McGilchrist and the differences of how the left and right hemispheres of the brain process information. He does a version that's different from how the wider culture tends to talk about them. If you happen to be familiar with that, one way of saying this is it's very easy to get into the left brain's way of functioning and then get stuck there, because that's what the left brain does. But part of how the lived experience is when we go into abstractions, we go into ideas, and we go into theories about what we could do and how the world works and how we can do good and how this idea comes about, it's very, very easy for the energy to raise in the body, to go into the head, and then to forget that we have a body. So a lot of what I'm going to be pointing at is the knowing of a kind of truth. It's actually the ground of knowing that you can sense in your body. It rings in your belly, in your heart, in your bones. So I'll give us more context, but the key thing I'll want to track, and I'll come back to this a couple of times. It's a very particular kind of exercise I'm going to invite us to try so we can dive into what it means to orient to these questions of what doing good can be without burning out, and what burnout is. These are difficult things to approach from the head, but they're immediately understandable to the body. So I want to show you that, but that requires having some very clear language and practice of grounding in the physicality. So I'll get there, but to start with, just notice there's a difference between being in the body versus getting into the theories. Right? That's a different kind of energy. So what I want to do here is first give some context about me, about where I'm coming from when I'm orienting to this whole topic. Like, what is unsaving the world? If you read the description, this starts with this claim that no one wants to save the world. It's kind of a bold claim, and I want to give it a little context. So I'll start by giving a little bit of my own history with this, and then we'll go into what I'm talking about with that theory, with that idea, but emphasis on noticing the idea. It's a lot of my work has to do with bridging between the intellectual and the somatic, making it so that there is something that the mind can understand, but also so that it is grounded in the body, because the body is what's here, and the body is what acts, and the body is, you can think of the body as your sense organ for truth. Like, it's here in reality. The mind is like a computer. When I say mind, by the way, I'm referring to a very specific type of sensation. I'll touch on that if it turns out to be important. Right now I'm using it loosely, but I don't mean anything the brain does. I'm talking about, one way you can think of it is as the left hemisphere functioning, if you're familiar with McGilchrist stuff. But if you're not, you can think of it as when you reflect on, well, what did I do first thing in the morning? When I first got out of bed, what was the first thing I did? Like, you can ask that question, but you ask that question to something, and that something answers. And if it says, oh, I think I climbed on top of the roof and yodeled, you can look at that and go, no, that's wrong, try again. You are having a conversation with something, and when it provides the correct answer, you know. So there's a lived experience that I'm tagging as, you are the user of an inner computer, and I'm calling that computer your mind. So making a clear distinction in the experience between you and the mind, just being able to track that experience and noticing that you are the one that experiences your body. Your mind, the computer, just talks about it. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go into a little bit of my own history, my own context for this. Sort of like where I am now, and why this is a relevant topic, where this comes from, and with Peter and I jamming about this. And then we'll get into the meat of it. Okay. So, yeah, I see Virginia mentioning the body knows too. It just has a different way of communicating with us. Yeah. I would actually go so far as to say the body is the only thing that knows. The mind does consistency checks. The mind doesn't know anything. But when we lose track of our bodies, we forget what kind of thing knowing is. Okay. So, so first I want to be transparent about my own lived experiences. I'm stepping into this. even this morning, as I was getting ready, I had this very familiar, agitated sensation that's still kind of present with me. A lot of how I used to do teaching, I've done a whole lot of teaching. I used to be a math teacher at university. Then later I would teach future math teachers. And then I went into 7 years of teaching applied psychology and rationality at the Center for Applied Rationality, the company that I co-founded. And my way of presenting would often I'm quite good at putting together a class design and at running through a course. But a lot of how I would do that is with a type of agitation that would, among other things, disembody me. I'd be worried about what other people are thinking. And that worry would actually be helpful for modeling my students. But it would also disconnect me from the relevance of what I'm saying. So I'm noticing something like 20% of that energy present with me right now. And it's giving me this little bit of agitation. That's what that electricity is about in the pit of my stomach, around my solar plexus. So there's this bit of extra energy in how I'm embodying and how I'm showing up right now. I don't mind, but this is something that my inner computer, my mind, loves to boot up and create as a little bit of an extra challenge. So I'm wanting to be transparent about that as I step forward. A part of me is trying to make sure that I'm presenting well, rather than just showing up as an embodiment of what it is that I want to share. Okay. So a lot of where that comes from, so the whole reason I founded the Center for Applied Rationality was looking at this global problem, the thing that now a lot of people know as the meta crisis. I was looking around going, okay, there are lots of efforts to try to do really good things for the world. There's all this stuff about environmentalism and political pressure and how do we clean up what's going on in politics in the Middle East and making sure people have drinking water throughout the third world. And the problem is that we were creating more and more severe problems more quickly than we were solving any of them, which struck me as, okay, well, we've got to deal with the root cause. So my whole energy behind this for creating CFAR, the Center for Applied Rationality, was, can we fix the core? The best guess I had was, well, the core seems to be that the human race is too crazy to solve its own problems. Can we make it sane and kind enough to be able to solve its own problems? I spent 7 years on that project. And at the end, I actually ended up dropping it because the internal engine of how that entire effort was working ended up collapsing under a type of politics that it couldn't solve. Right? Which is interesting. You try to solve the basic problem of human sanity and it bubbles down and destroys itself because it's insane. I go, oh, okay, so now what? And this is something like the longest running and most recent version of various Save the World attempts. Before then, I was a pretty big advocate for trying a quirky approach to ending aging, which is not a very popular activist angle, but I was totally bringing to it the sort of energy that people do with things like environmentalist activism and social activism. I won't go into the content of why that particular one, but like there's very much an energy of, oh, I think this will save the world. So I have a long history of looking at everything and going, how do I contribute to making things good? This is important. Let me throw my entire life force and energy and being into doing that. This actually brought me to a place of a lot of depression. And I actually didn't realize how much depression until I stopped and I took a break. There was actually a brief period where I had a brush with suicidality. I didn't go so far as trying to take my life, but I started watching my mind, like this inner computer, producing plans. That freaked me out. Right? So when I talk about, when I put together a phrase like, oh, no one wants to save the world, let's unsave the world, what I'm looking at is not, oh, I don't care, or I think it's hopeless. It's more that I'm attending to the fact that in practice, this approach doesn't seem to work. Now, a bunch of that was my own lived experience, but during my time at CFAR, a lot of the people I would interact with were a group that would call themselves effective altruists. This is under a kind of a practical philosophical orientation of saying, well, if I want to feed the homeless and one charity converts my dollar into more food than another does, then it makes more sense to donate to the first charity than the second. So let me put energy into finding out which charities are worth donating to so that my donation dollars matter more. And then effective altruism in general tends to ask the question, well, what happens if we maximize that way of thinking? What is the most good we can do? Logically, it makes a lot of sense. In practice, what I kept seeing over and over and over again with individuals and with larger conversations throughout the effective altruist community is a tremendous amount of burnout. Like one of the most effective strategies people calculated out was, oh, if I become a, what's the term? I think it was an investment banker, if I remember right, but some sort of thing in finance. If I become, if I sort of sell my soul to make as much money as I can, and then I donate to the most effective charities that I can, according to something like GiveWell, where GiveWell does all of this detailed research to figure out which charities are worth donating to, then by making a ton of money and donating most of my money to these effective charities, I can do the most good. There are some things that arguably might be a little bit better, but it's hard to beat this strategy. The problem is that basically everybody who does this strategy, what's called earning to give, ends up somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 3 years in, feeling horrid. Not literally everybody, but there's a pretty significant tendency. Most of the people who go into this can't live, they can't embody the feeling of what they are doing as being fulfilling. This just comes up over and over and over and over again. The whole rationality community, where my company sort of got its roots and all of its energy from, was founded on fear of what happens when computers become as intelligent as humans, and in particular are capable of editing their own code and improving. When computers are capable of doing software engineering and are able to improve their own intelligence, we end up with something that's called an intelligence explosion, and the human race gets outsmarted by machines. And then those machines, whatever they value or don't value, ends up being what gets printed onto the universe, and most versions are not good for humans. That vision and trying to fix it, trying to make it so that we will do good in the future, that we will have a positive singularity that will create friendly AI, was the foundation of the rationality community. And unsurprisingly, you find a whole lot of people there who alternate between anxiety and depression. Because if you think that there is some sort of evil God that is going to wake up and destroy the world, and you have a very thin sliver of a chance to do anything about it, and if you don't, then you are morally bankrupt. Like there's a kind of anxiety and exhaustion that appears. So what I want to highlight as we go into the meat of the mechanics is that it's not an accident that each one of these break down. It's not an accident that earning to give results in this kind of exhaustion. It's not an accident that seeing this possibility of unfriendly AI, of AI risk, and then trying to do something about it with this kind of, well, we've got to save the world in this way. It's not a coincidence that this results in a kind of breakdown and exhaustion. It's actually a systematic mechanism. And it's related to this thing that I tried to phrase as compressedly as I could, as nobody wants to save the world. It seems sort of paradoxical in the context of I just gave a bunch of examples of people who want to save the world. But I want to be very particular about what want means in this case. And to be even more particular, to be more exact, the wanting there is mental. There is a kind of picture of the world that you have to hallucinate and live in and become disembodied in order to live in order to see the world that way. when you track what the actual physical body desire is that relates to this attempt to save the world, it's coming from a different place. And there isn't a stable relationship between the body and the mind that allows save the world to be the focus. So I want to show you that. I want to give you a chance to feel it and see how the mechanisms work. This involves a fair amount of digging, and it's hard to even know whether that's possible in 90 minutes or even 3 sessions of 90 minutes. But this is sort of me trying to give the mental snapshot of where we're going. So I want to pause there and give a chance to see, before we dig into the meat of the experience and idea of the model that I'm looking at. Do you have any questions or comments that are burning that you really need to put forward in order to be present?
And you can just raise your hand with the icon or in your video, or just put something in the chat and I can call on you. I personally don't have any questions, but David Swedlow does.
Cool. Kind of a question and an observation. Even in the asking the question, I can feel what you're talking about. There's something in me of the wanting to get the right approach to this feels very active in my body, and the projection in my mind of what fixed looks like, what the working version looks like. It's interesting. I can feel the tension between my thought of what it looks like and my feeling of what it looks like. I can feel myself wandering in and out of that. Feeling the tension of wanting to, this is good, this is going to be good, and hold on a minute, what's going to be good? Where am I? So yeah. That's an interesting observation.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Well, anyone else? Cool. Could we do another wave of what are you feeling in your body, just in the text? Like right now, I'm actually feeling a little, like that energy in my solar plexus is a little more dissolved, and I feel a kind of, like the energy is a little more free and is moving up into my chest. And there's a part of me that feels a little bit surprised, like, oh, wow, this is coming out a lot clearer than I thought it would. Cool. Okay, great. There's a whole lot of variety here. Some bits of energy, some excitement, happiness, humor, feeling the weight of the body in the chair. That's really good and grounded. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Thank you. I've swinging all the way across the pendulum from, I've done a whole lot of teaching math and a whole lot of teaching martial arts. And getting this contrast of all in the mind, all in the body, although a lot of, even in the body, there's a tendency to teach from the mind. It can be very tricky in that respect. But this, most of my initial teaching experience was more in martial arts, and then going into academia, and then going, okay, are there any questions? And then seeing everybody staring, going, are you even here? It's really good to be in a format like the Stoa, where we can do slightly socially weird things like, okay, so what kind of tingles are you feeling in your body? And because that's more real, it's more human, it's more actually being here. And that seems to me part of the point, part of the grounding. Okay, so that's my mind going, all right, so now you want to convey this feeling. And my mind goes, what feeling? How am I supposed to say this? All right, so the first thing I'd like to invite you to do is take a deep breath. Make the exhale longer than the inhale if you can. Notice how that changes the quality of your body. Take another deep breath. Exhale longer than the inhale. I'd invite you, like, keep breathing that way if you like. The point of this is to calm the body. It's a clever trick to play with the autonomic nervous system. What you're looking for in your body is where there is a place of safety. You feel kind of loose, open, easy. There's no concept here. You're looking for a sensation. A clever trick I picked up recently is if you can try feeling your earlobes, the way that your earlobes have no tension in them, the way they kind of hang there. I'm just noticing the feeling. Let's see, maybe the only place that feels like that is your earlobes. That's okay. You can just pay attention there. Maybe there's somewhere else in your body that you can also feel this. Let's take a few moments to breathe into it. When working with the body, like, go ahead and keep breathing into it and paying attention. Keep your awareness on your body. Track to see when I'm going to say some things, but prioritize feeling your body. You'll hear me fine. You'll hear what you need to hear. Don't worry if you miss some of the ideas that I share. This is not the point. The point is this feeling. I just want to give a little context about the feeling. When we're working with the body, the rhythms are a lot slower than those of the mind. The culture, the westernized world, is very mental and very fast because of that, like a computer. So when we turn our attention to the body, the rhythms that we're talking about, the rate at which, if you pay attention to the ease in the body, in the space of safety, many people, not everyone, but many people may find that feeling expanding. But the rate of expansion isn't that of a thought. It's a little bit more like if you have sunlight on your skin, the warmth can start to penetrate your body. And you can pay attention to that. So just being aware of that. It takes time. Ideally, we'd spend something like 15, 20 minutes just breathing into that and really feeling the safety in the body. Because of the cultural context we're in, that can feel a little weird, and 20 minutes out of 90 is a lot of time. So what I want you to do here is just be very conscious that you know this feeling. The knowing isn't mental. It's not a verbal thought. It's a direct experience, the sense of spaciousness, the sense of ease. And in particular, if you're tapping into it, there'll be an exception, and I'll make a note about this in a moment. But in particular, if you're able to feel this expanding sense of ease, I bet that you can notice a way in which that has a quality of something like rightness. The way that slowing down, taking a breath, and recognizing, oh, I don't actually want to argue this point. When you're in a tense argument with somebody you love, and you notice, wait, this isn't what I want to do. There's a way that that can feel weird, but there's also a way where it can feel very right. To take a breath and go, wait, this doesn't matter. What matters is the care. The body knows the rightness. Now, I want to make a note that some people may actually be responding right now, and this is totally normal, may be responding to the feeling of safety with tension. The body may actually be reacting to the tension. We can go into the reasons for that, but I want to let you know this is very normal. This is part of the sort of trauma structures that we can carry in our bodies. when safety itself can feel threatening because it means opening up in ways that make you vulnerable. So it's very normal. Some people will respond to, like, they feel the looseness and it'll accelerate their minds. And they'll actually lose track of their bodies and won't be able to feel their toes anymore. Until I mention it, you can bring the attention to the toes and then right back into the mind. So if that's happening for you, that's okay. That is actually perfectly fine. Just notice that. So I want you to keep paying attention to the body sensations. And I'm going to say a couple of things. I just want you to notice what your body does. Okay. So recently I saw a video headline from Daniel Schmachtenberger. Okay. Just pause there. Notice, did you feel your body shift? Okay. Okay. I noticed a video title from Daniel Schmachtenberger where I forget exactly what he said. I didn't watch the video. I just looked at the title and I went, yep, that is a thing Daniel would say. Okay. The title said something like, we need a cultural enlightenment or we're fucked. Okay. Now, he said similar things before. Okay. I'm slowing down to go meta for a moment. I'm slowing down the rate at which I'm saying this because I want you to notice how, as I say these words, there's a pull. There's this pull towards, here are the concepts, here are the ideas. Can you feel both the sucking away from awareness of the body and the body's reaction? This is not a claim about these ideas being wrong or that it's wrong to think. I'm trying to highlight a mechanism, a very specific mechanism. I just want you to watch it in slow motion. Okay. So, aware of the body. And but Daniel has said this model quite a few times about a self-terminating civilization. And the problem where the mechanisms by which we run culture, where there is I forget exactly how he breaks this down, but one way I think of it as we have a linear economy where we extract resources, convert it into a one-time use, and then dump it. And then we keep doing this process and creating, for instance, what you see in landfills. Right? This extraction process with exponentially increasing technology, exponentially increasing power on a finite playing field means we are going to run out of resources. But because there are so many actors on the field, no one can afford not to contribute to the accelerating technology. Okay, so again, feel the body. I would love to see some notes in the text. What are you noticing happening in your body as I say this, as we talk about this, or as I just highlight this? What are you experiencing? Stomach upset, tightening in the chest. Yeah. Grief, sadness. Visuals pull me out of body sensations. Yeah, I'm really susceptible to that one. Shoulder tension, sense of anxiety. Yeah. Tension in the chest. Yeah. A sort of general dimming of feeling. Yeah, kind of numbing out. Alternating suffocation and love. Well, that's a beautiful way of saying that. My stomach grips and my mind scatters to meta problems. Yeah. I keep wanting to take notes and start writing to get away from this feeling. Yes, yes, yeah. Getting away from is a very common theme here. Physical frustration with the propagation of mimetic hazards. Yeah. Little unraveling at the sternum, sweaty palms. Yeah. Zoom in and out of reality tunnels. You have to intuit what you mean by reality tunnels. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Another thing to notice is as you read these, as you listen to them, do you notice how your body reacts? Okay. This instrument is immensely finely tuned. It's constantly responding to its environment, and the environment includes the mind. It includes the world that you inhabit through mental simulation. This is actually one of the great powers of the mind, the fact that we can extend our senses by creating simulated worlds that are disconnected from our bodies. It's immensely powerful, it's immensely useful. But it's only useful if it roots back in the body, only if it relates right back to the bodily experience. And this is, without that rooting, it can become an escape. This is like the core, like the core mechanism behind how trauma sustains. I'm using the word trauma in a fairly general way. I think this is becoming quite standard. The way in which we sort of store in our bodies the kind of anxiety that we feel about something, or the fear, something's happened to us. Physically, a trauma is a blow. It's something that damages the tissue. There's something analogous at almost like we have an emotional body, a sort of like the place at which we feel music or we feel love. It's like a trauma is like a blow at that level. And then we're sort of carrying this way of holding this wound, holding this difficulty with us, almost like, oh, it's like we broke our arm, so now we have to cradle the arm. There's something like that that happens that we carry around with us. One of the most basic mechanisms that our culture teaches us, when I say our culture, I mean like westernized world, which is basically going to be almost everybody who shows up to these. It's like if you're talking through something like the Stoa on a Zoom call, the chances are very good that you're operating in a westernized culture in the sense that I mean. I see this question from Tim Harap. Trauma, yes, but what do you have to say about moral injury? You're gonna have to clarify what you mean by moral injury. I don't know what you mean. I may have thoughts, I just don't know what the phrase moral injury is referring to in this case for you. So the most basic mechanism we're taught for how to deal with when something is too overwhelming for our bodies to process, for our bodies to handle in the moment, if this is too uncomfortable. Sort of like if you're watching a film with a lot of gore, you might find yourself squirming and like having to close your eyes. This is an indication of how much charge, how much experience you can't hold. And that's just like a description of lived experience. This is just, oh, I can't, da, da, da. Do you imagine you keep getting exposed to things that are beyond what you can hold? Your only response is to do some kind of numbing process. And the main numbing mechanism that we use in the westernized world is to create a mental model, often multiple mental models, and try to live there. And create a thought construct and try to live there. And this is using the mind's ability to extend the senses of the body, but emphasizing the part where you have to leave the senses of your body in order to go there. Okay. An easy way to see this is to watch someone's eyes when they're thinking. Okay. Just try watching this. What did you do yesterday evening? Okay. Do you notice what your eyes want to do just there? Okay. It's a little hard when you're trying to track this consciously, because then you're trying to watch your eyes and then that brings your awareness right back to what your eyes are seeing. But there's this little friction most people experience, this sort of like the eyes are trying to look a little off to wherever they're seeing. Sometimes it's up to the ceiling or down to the floor. It can look all kinds of places, but your eyes are not looking at what they're pointed at. Part of the reason for that, I think, is that you're trying to engage your inner senses with what your mind, your inner computer is presenting you with. And in order to do that, it's helpful for you to look somewhere where you don't have a lot of visual stimulation, unlike a human face. If you're staring at a human face in a social situation, it can be really difficult to check out and go somewhere else. But I bet that you've seen this too, even with somebody looking at you and they sort of, right, the eyes kind of fuzz out because they're going off into their own world. They're sort of dissociating. There's nothing wrong with this. It just means that where you are living is not the world. Part of the process of making yourself safe, if you keep being overwhelmed by the world, is to go into a mental model that can keep you protected and sort of seal the boundaries. And to make it so that you will live there. Right? So you're walking around with this mental simulation of reality. This is part of why when you're carrying a lot of trauma, a lot of nervousness, it doesn't necessarily feel like you are carrying it. It feels like the world is threatening. Oh, like nobody's ever nice to me. Or why can't I get ahead with, like, why can't I just clear my head and do what I need to in order to like make a promotion or deal with the kitchen sink or whatever. That why can't I? Like, who's talking to whom? Like, a huge amount of this is just creating a simulation that you can live in that includes an icon of you. So what I'm highlighting, I'm trying to highlight, give you this sort of lived experience, but also the mental model, like to give you the sense of this is what the lived experience is, and here's a way to extend the senses into how the mind works. There's this movement of, when we talk about stuff like, well, I don't know, maybe the entire global civilization is going to collapse. Food chain supplies are going to break. Electricity and internet might break down. Then what? How will you do? Right? That creates a simulation, a mental simulation that is frightening to the body. Right? Whether it's accurate or not is a different question. What I'm highlighting is a truth that you can feel. When you think thoughts like this, and when you expose yourself repeatedly to thoughts like this, it creates a simulation that when you live in, frightens the body. And in particular, that fear is not to your physical surroundings. It is not to what is happening to you. It is to a future possibility. Your body is activating a fight or flight response to a physical emergency that isn't here. So that mechanism can cause you to dissociate from your body and look for a mental world to live in. Ah, but you already had a mental world that was letting you dissociate from your body, which is this terror that maybe you're going to starve. Right? So this is one way that you can end up in a loop where you use the anxiety of the body to power the boundaries and keep you locked in a terrifying world where the effort to stay in the world is an attempt to avoid feeling the terror. This is just one example. There are lots and lots and lots of examples like this. Like, most of the time, most people are going around flitting from one mental world to another, trying to avoid the sensations of the body that are getting stimulated by being in these worlds, some of which are practically designed to create this anxiety in the body. Okay, so I see we have a question. Virginia Wilcox asks, and this is where the burnout begins to manifest because of the dissociation? In part. There's the experience of burnout, I claim, is actually the body expressing that the use of energy and the lack of recovery is out of touch with physical reality. The problem is that that's not how it's experienced on the inside, because the cause is living in a hallucination. Okay, so if you keep living there after a while, yes. But it gets trickier because one of the effects, one of the things that you'll see very commonly, and if you watch in yourself, I bet you'll find this too. This is hard to avoid in the westernized world. There's a tendency to use the body as an instrument for a theory. Like you actually try to live in your castle in the sky and then use the body like a remote control to implement things according to what this mental hallucination thinks is important. Okay. I'll give examples of that in a moment, but that disconnect and trying to make the body do things exacerbates the problem. A very simple example of this is when you say to yourself something like, I should reply to that email. Okay, well, why aren't you? Like that, I don't mean like, why aren't you? But like, just notice, well, what are the causes? There's a cause for you thinking you should and still not doing it. And is it true that you should? Not, can your mind produce answers to the question, why is it a good idea to reply? That's a different question. The question is it true that you should reply to the email? We tend not to ask these questions. Instead, there's a tendency to go, oh, like I've been putting that thing off. I need to, okay, I'm gonna make myself do it. Okay, again, who's talking to whom? Okay, so the, like two checks are happening in my mind. Two things are popping together. So the first thing is the way I've been talking about all this so far, for the last, I don't know, like 10 minutes, a lot of fleshing out mental models, and in particular, trying to get the mind to have a coherent picture of how to relate to what's going on with the body. But that's still in the mind. So first, let's reground. How are you feeling? Take a breath. For me, I'm feeling a lot of energy, like a whole lot of tingling going through my arms and my lungs. There are parts of me in the emotional dimension sort of echoing through my chest and my belly. It's echoing with this, oh, I should. I don't even need to say what I should, just the, oh, I should, boom, 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 boom. There's like this echo that goes through my system. The familiarity of self-forcing and pain and anxiety. And so I'm feeling the echoes of having rung that bell in my body. So I want to pause that theory arc and highlight a different one. It's going to relate closely to what we're doing. When I highlighted this question of, is it true? This is an example of a general principle. The general principle of what does it mean to track truth? So when I ask a question like, how do you feel your feet? There are two ways to answer that question. One is to pump that question to the mind. It's answering a slightly different question. You're answering the question, what thoughts do you produce when you ask your mind how you feel your feet? Okay. But that isn't how it's experienced on the inside. On the inside, it feels like, well, I mean, I guess I feel my feet because I have the nerves that connect up to the brain somehow, and it somehow connects to the spine. And there's some kind of process that I guess happens in the brain that has me do that. Okay, that's going up into the mind. It's disconnecting from the experience and it's checking with models. And part of the secret of the mind is that the mind has nothing to do with truth. It doesn't feel like that on the inside when you ask the mind, because the mind doesn't have a damn clue what truth is. The mind's job is consistency. Its job is to figure out why everything fits its model. Okay? But when you're living in the mind, consistency feels like truth. Okay? So when you go up and you check, oh, it's related to these nerves, or oh, I read this book in Buddhism about how consciousness is this fundamental fabric of reality, and this creates, this allows all the emerging, so I'm able to feel my feet because it's in the field of consciousness. Well, great. Do you feel your feet while you're saying that? Okay. Not to say that that's bad, just highlighting, oh, well, that means you went up into your mind. I see Laura Cleveland asking, what do you think generates poetic language? I don't know. This is a power of the mind. The fact that the mind can jump in and form consistency models. This is incredibly valuable and useful. But there's a little bit of a quality here for the most part. If the only move that you find available is to go up into the mind, it's a little bit like asking your calendar what you should do with your life. That's not what the calendar is for. But if you ask the calendar, it doesn't know that. The calendar's job is to be consistent within a certain framework. You set the framework. So the other direction you can do when I ask you something like, how do you feel your feet, is to go down into experience. You answer the question by feeling your feet and watching how you do it. After you do that, you can then pump that information to the mind, and the mind can try to articulate it. But that happens afterwards. Okay? That first version is actually inarticulable in the first step. Right? It is nonverbal. Again, if you're familiar with McGilchrist's model of the hemispheres of the brain, what I'm highlighting is the fact that Broca's area is in the left hemisphere, and it's the thing that produces speech. So if you want to have the context of the right hemisphere, you need to do a move that is fundamentally nonverbal. That doesn't mean it's not verbalizable, but there are limits to what the verbalization can do, and it has to come second. So this distinction between going up into the mind versus going down into experience, this is a really critical difference for you to track and for your mind to be able to notice is a possible distinction, even though your mind cannot do the going down into experience move. All it can do is invite you to remember that such a move exists. There's a bunch of, there's actually some bits of computer science that suggest what the limitations are of the mind with respect to going down. It relates to Gödel's incompleteness theorem of all things. Okay. But the short version is that anytime you find the mind getting deeply confused, this is a great sign that you are running into the limitations of the mind. You can orient to confusion. The mind, the only thing the mind can do with respect to confusion is try to solve it. So the reason for that piece is it's extremely tempting in our culture to answer almost every question by going up into the mind. What makes you happy? Well, okay, that's answering a different question. The question you answer when you go, well, these things make me happy, is you're going up into a model in your mind, usually that includes a model of you, where there's an icon over here, which is sort of like having an avatar in a computer. It's like there's an icon on your computer screen that is labeled me. And then you look at what this icon on the screen is doing, interacting with the other parts of this program in order to find out, ah, that's what makes me happy. Which is a dramatically different question from taking a breath and feeling Where is happiness? And in particular, noticing that that question can't be verbal to ask it when going down. It's a sense. So, what does it mean to try to save the world? Okay. From the perspective of grounded truth, from the perspective of being in the body, this is the world. What needs saving? Don't ask the mind, look. What needs saving? Okay. What do you feel in your body when you try to answer that question by going down? Toss some things in the text. I want to see. What are you noticing in your body when you try to answer that question by going down into experience? I like Virginia's comment. I'll get to that in a moment. I want to feel where everybody is and if you're feeling the thing. Right, so Jacob Sven says, me, I need saving. I want to note that's an answer, not a feeling in your body. We do. I want to save myself and what I love. Again, that's an answer, not a feeling in your body. Right, do you notice this slippery bit where the mind wants to answer the question, but it's even answering the wrong question, right? Right? The question isn't what needs saving. That's the question I invited you to look down to answer. The question I asked you to put in the text is, what are you feeling in your body when you try to look down to answer the question? Right? And no one's doing anything wrong. You're actually highlighting the mechanism I'm trying to point out. It's extremely hard to stay with the body when doing this. Okay? Feels confusing, nothing to save. Right, so there's a feeling of confusion, although I would want to press a little bit more saying, what does confusion feel like in the body? And then nothing to save is again an answer. Peace, yeah, peace can be a sensation, yeah. I felt this before many times, but I forgot to come back here too many times. Yeah, this forgetting is fascinating, isn't it? We want to save the world, but we don't have a fucking clue what we're talking about and we avoid looking, right? There's a buzzing edginess like angry bees. Yeah, that resonates a lot for me. Like I would get this in my rib cage. Wake up, become alert. Pain, heaviness, quietness in the body. Articulating the body into words is hard. I feel frustration and anger in the asking. Okay, yeah. A fun fact, anger and the related emotional range of anger is the only emotion that the left hemisphere is consistently responsible for. The rest of the emotional range is the right hemisphere. So this is one of the reasons why you'll often find anger being a surface emotion on top of deeper, more vulnerable feelings. Because the job of the left hemisphere is to extract things from context and wrap it in a model. So sometimes you'll find the boundary of your models guarded with anger or frustration or impatience. Right? So when there's a sense of, but I can't, I'm being asked to articulate my body, this is frustrating. Well, guess why? If you were to focus on your body sensations and put the articulation center in service of being present to your body, it would break down the walled garden of the simulation, and it would violate the consistency efforts of the left hemisphere, and it doesn't like having its game broken. So it fights back. Not always, but typically when you feel anger about looking at truth, or frustration or impatience about looking at truth, the reason is the part of you that is keeping you from having to be in touch with that painful truth is trying to optimize for consistency. And that's the tool it has available to keep you from doing so. The other one is to create a simulation that stimulates fear or pain, inadequacy, something like that. It can create a mental simulation that can stimulate the body. Like what we were talking about before of, oh, what if food supply chains break? Oh, well, food supply chains aren't broken. In fact, I don't see a food supply chain. I see a room. Being grounded back in reality is very grounding, right? So you have to simulate things in your mind to be scared when there's nothing attacking you in your physical world. Yeah, I love this point. My body wants more time and just wants the attention to stay with all the varied movement and sensations happening in the body. Yeah, yeah. The body is really hungry for attention for most people. Okay. So I want to scroll back up to this comment that Virginia left. There's kind of a paragraph here. She says, regarding truth, I'm realizing that I've had an assumption that if I cannot articulate verbally an experience, then that experience may not be real or true. And I get into a loop of self-doubt, like as if the mind is overriding the body's wisdom because the mind doesn't know how to interpret the somatic experience. I want to give more credence to my body's knowing and not should myself into having to make words and logic myself out of the sensation. Yeah, so there's a whole arc here that we don't have time to go into, but I want to briefly highlight about something about what it means to live in the westernized world. If you take a bunch of children and you stick them, like a bunch of active children who are learning how to use their bodies and are engaging their minds in a curious exploration of the world, you take like 6, 7, 8-year-olds, and you stick them in a desk and tell them to stop moving and stare at a board for hours a day. And then you ask them things like, okay, so like if the kids ask things like, why do we need to learn this bit of mathematics? Like my expertise is in math education. And so I think this is particularly acute for my awareness in this area. If a kid asks, why do we need to learn math? And the answer comes back as something like, oh, well, you need it when you grow up. You need it to function in society, which like, it's like a patent, like that's not quite true. Like if you actually need mathematics when you're operating in society, you'll learn it as you need it, like you do everything else, right? So what's that about? You need it for the next math class, which I need why? Oh, so that you can get into college. I need why, right? There's this way that the kinds of both the physical setting and the way information is conveyed. The idea that learning is about ideas and information, it's about conveying models. And there is this constant invalidation. You have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. Right? A punishment can be that you don't get to go to recess and you have to keep working on these ideas because you did too poorly. Like, so there's something about, and I don't mean to just pick on school. School is just a very clear, obvious example of this mechanism. The fact that our culture highlights staring at a screen for hours at a time as a basic form of entertainment, and that you have to go to specialized institutions like gyms in order to get yourself to exercise, to get your body to not atrophy. Like there's something weird and disconnected about the way that our culture relates to how we connect to our bodies. And this has been a major feature of how the Western, how like European culture managed to conquer the world. It did so by being able to ignore a lot of things that made sense and being able to amplify power in models that could be checked against reality. Science is born out of the ability to disconnect from the body and then reconnect. The and then reconnect part has been thoroughly, not thoroughly broken, but pretty significantly broken. This is a really basic element that you'll find in Western culture. So one of the ways that this shows up is if you have a knowing, but you can't say it, then you're probably not thinking clearly. Okay? That's bullshit. It is absolutely backwards. Because where does the knowing come from? How do you recognize when you say something like 2 + 3 = 5? You don't know that because the mind has a consistency check. You know it because when you interpret that sentence into something your body can feel, there is a clear ringing of truth based on your body's experience of reality. All knowledge is somatic. So you have to disconnect from what knowing is in order to operate in this hallucination. That's about as much as I want to say about the Western structure. It just seems worth highlighting that this is a really common element, and it highlights the conundrum we're in. It really highlights the conundrum we're in. Okay, so I want to quickly tie this back to this business of saving the world, and no one wants to save the world. Approximately speaking, almost nobody knows what the world is. Okay. An easy example of this is most people cannot point in the right direction if they want to point towards, for instance, Paris. If you're in Paris, it's easy. Okay. So it turns out that Paris is almost straight east of me. It's on the same, I forget whether it's latitude or longitude, but the line running east-west along the Earth, almost exactly the same line. So that's straight east. However, Paris is basically through the ground. And I've worked out this angle because my partner is currently living near Paris. And so I wanted to have some sense of physically, where is she? Oh, she's that way. She's through the ground because the Earth is curved, and it's actually to the northeast. I won't go into all of the geometry of why, but if you actually play with a globe, you can start to notice, oh, a lot of the intuitions about what the world physically even is are dramatically wrong if you just take basic information like Paris is to the east, which is like a word, and that's east, therefore Paris is that way. But if you go that way, you actually leave the Earth. Right? So there's this, and this is just something as simple as where is Paris? How are you going to get something right like how should we organize the economic system? How should we debate politics? What kind of interventions would allow us to do good sense making as we try to navigate this strange meta-crisis? Like, if the only way that you have to talk about these things is based on disconnecting from the only ground of truth you have in order to live in these fragmented models, then what are you talking about? This isn't to say that these concepts have no truth. It's that truth isn't the reason they're being said. Okay. So this business about, well, what actually causes people to want to save the world? They don't even know what that means, and they don't know that they don't know. And I include myself in this. This is from a lot of lived experience and from a lot of talking to and seeing people navigate this stuff. As far as I can tell, like, so in the effective altruist community, easily the most common tone is this sense of guilt and overwhelm from a kind of obligation to do the most good they can. There's a kind of Protestant guilt that sort of hangs over them. And now, I could give some ideas about where this comes from. It's going to differ from person to person, but the cultural tone has this element of we really want to do good in the world, and I believe that. I absolutely believe that. I think that that's coming from a clear place in the heart. But the models that they're living under, this focus on let me solve this problem. Right? Here's the core issue. If there's a kind of a pithy and quirky way of saying this. It's its own conceptual arc, but it's something that, again, I invite you to feel how your body tunes to this, rather than trying to loop into mental fragmentations about what this concept is saying. We can do the mental stuff, but the somatic part is the most critical. Okay. If you are getting value and or meaning from fighting a problem, then you dare not win. Okay. This may not be conscious, but it is an influence. It may not be the intention, but it is an influence. Okay. So an example of this is in, let me see if I can, there are lots of examples, and almost all the ones that are jumping to mind are very controversial. Let me see if I can find an easy one, one that's not very activating. There is a, so recurring relationship problems. Like the kind of problem where if I really want my partner to respond emotionally to me, and I pressure her into being more responsive, and my pressure causes her to recoil, there's a way where I can, I'm sort of validated in my need to press because she's withdrawing. If I'm focused on that validation, like, well, come on, she's being unreasonable. She's closing down. Right? Well, like, how can I relate to that? Right? If I'm relating to that by getting value from the effort, then that value would have to be part of what I sacrifice in order to actually end the dynamic. Another example of where this shows up, just to bring this into a larger point of view. Okay, I see your note, Peter. I'll switch in a second. Another example of where this comes up is if you have a well, where I would see this, for instance, in the rationality community, there is a kind of glee that a lot of people would get about how screwed we are, about the possibility of what AI is going to do, and how hard it is. The emphasis being on painting this horrific picture, because the horror is a sign that what they're doing in order to work on saving the world through math and computer science, the feeling of horror helps to validate that what they are doing is meaningful. But if they were to succeed at coming up with a theory, or if the whole world were to pivot and go, oh, this is important, let's take a breath and actually address this, that actually makes them matter less. It makes the meaning and value that they're able to get individually, in the sense of salvation that they can get from pouring their energy into this model. They can't ease the body's pain that way anymore. So one of the big problems that keeps showing up over and over and over again is that the energy of where to go to, where the choice to try to save the world is coming from, has more to do with navigating the sense of inadequacy and pain in the body than it does with making sure that the model is grounded in truth. This is despite the conscious efforts. I want to emphasize that I think that most people who are like pushing for a lot of try to save the world stuff, they're really trying. But they're trying from the fragmented psyche perspective for the most part. They can't answer questions like, where is Paris? That's going to make the entire effort dramatically difficult. And most key, it is going to keep them from being able to notice when that anxiety and sense of inadequacy is driving the engine in the background. So I want to, so it looks like there's a couple of questions, and I want to field questions and give people a chance to jump in, comment, etc. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to mention we have 2 more sessions coming of diving into this. Part of the reason for that is that this kind of work takes time. Frankly, I don't think 3 weeks is enough time. Okay. But I want to give us time to come back to the feeling of this, grounding, practicing, and also touching on some theory elements, because guaranteed the mind is going to throw a hissy fit, because what we're looking at is breaking down the mind's ability to dissociate awareness from the body. And that feels terrifying. And that's against the programming. So there's a lot of relating to theory and a whole lot of practice that's involved in doing this work. So what exactly the next weeks are going to look like, I'm not quite sure. In part, that has to do with feeling. I needed to feel this session, and then I'm going to sit with it. And then, actually, I'm not quite sure how announcements come out about this stuff, but yeah, we'll find out what what the future sessions end up being like.
So Michael, do you have a hard stop at the bottom of the hour? Like, could we go a little bit on it, just to like sneak in at least 2 questions?
I am comfortable with that, yes.
Cool. So I'd like to sneak in at least Laura's question, Evan's question. So perhaps Laura, if you can go first.
Okay, hi. Yeah, thank you for your talk. I appreciate both the way you set it out and the intention and the problems it's trying to address. I think they're, yeah, beautiful and kind of oriented in the right direction. I think, so I'm in the middle of this kind of playful experiment with myself, having done some somatic practices and having spent time just grounding in the body, really just trying to let thought dissolve, and realizing at a certain point that there was a way in which that energy that was naturally arising in me actually wanted to be expressed in conversation. There was a sense that I was like negating a realm or a mode of interaction with myself and with reality and with other people that was nourishing and precious to me. So I kind of began to I began to reconsider, yeah, whether there wasn't a way to engage with the mind playfully, creatively, even allowing its kind of like its ability to kind of be senseless, you know, like giving yourself moments of flight, you know, and then returning to the ground, learning how to kind of modulate between mental models and grounded embodied experience. So yeah, I'm kind of in the play of that, and I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts in that direction of like not cutting off or negating thought and its kind of transcendent capacities, but incorporating them or learning to use them skillfully and playfully.
Absolutely. I love this question. It feels like nourishing to my heart and tummy. There's a little bit of alertness, like, how did I give that impression? Yes, I very much agree. The mind is absolutely beautiful gift. The whole reason we're able to construct something like a meta crisis is from this beautiful power of the mind. The ability to like even something as immensely abstract as mathematics. The whole way that actually works. Like I have my own side rant about how basically nobody has ever taught mathematics. What people are taught is computation. And they're often taught it in kind of a traumatizing way so that it's hard to relate to what the actual Ars Mathematica is. Mathematics at its core is very much this process of honoring the ability of the mind to not just calculationally, but creatively, dynamically, find these interrelationships of deep structures of reality and penetrate senses into parts of existence that our physical senses cannot do. I think of the mind as sort of like a sense extender. It lets us feel into the world in more detail and farther out and deeper in than we can do just by being animals. And the relevance of that comes from when it's rooted back in the material. Because there's not a coincidence that our words matter, maternal, and material are all the same. Like it comes from the same Latin root word of mother, mater, and matrix, yes. So this, like getting this rooted back in the body, that's what understanding mathematics is. You can't understand it with a mental model. The mental model is this intermediary stage. But when you get it, there's this, oh, like mathematicians will often talk about euphoria when they see the insight. The euphoria isn't just mental, it's coming from the interplay of seeing deep truths and relating it to the body. I'm using mathematics as an extreme example. I think the same thing is true when we try to look at things like economics and politics, etc. Absolutely. What my call is not to abandon the mind at all. My call is to invite us to notice that the foundation of the mind is the body, and that the thoughts can't matter until they root in the material, and that there is a force that you can feel when you orient somatically that causes us to do something different and to sort of live in a hallucination. Just noticing that, reversing that, so we can use the mind properly. Thank you for that question.
Beautiful, thank you.
Let's take in Evan.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Michael. So it's funny, this whole session I've really enjoyed, and reminds me of some conversations that I had with you. I don't know if you remember, at a 2014 summer CFAR workshop. So it's good to see you again. That being said, so my question here is, when we zoom out and return to this question of the meta crisis and how to approach it, the models presented in this session, which I think I approximately endorse, seem to suggest that this whole solving the meta crisis is a bit of a cogito hazard, in the sense that focusing our mental awareness on the existence of a meta crisis is likely to exert a paralytic effect overall on our being. So given this, I'm wondering if you would agree with the statement that it's better on average to focus on problem spaces where there's a more local or visceral connection to our embodied experience, rather than to these vast global problem spaces, which contain problems of such magnitude that our individual ability to affect them is approximately epsilon.
The short answer is yes. Although I want to be a little more specific. What I would want to say is, do things you can feel. Okay. There is part of the point of our capacity of the mind and all these models is that we can learn to feel more. One of the problems we've run into is that we are substituting feeling, and we're substituting thinking for feeling. I don't just mean in terms of emotion. I'm talking about things like, does it feel like Paris is that way? Or does it feel like Paris is in France? Noticing that in France has the same quality as in Hogwarts. Right? There's this mental hallucination quality that if I'm not even aware that I have this sensation of hallucination, I am disconnected from truth. The only place that I can't act on the economy. I can't act on my relationship. All I can do is act in this present moment. And the only place I seem to be able to do anything is in terms of where I bring my attention. What quality of intention and attention do I bring to now? I seem to be capable of doing something that makes my fingers move. I can't help with the homeless problem, but I can do things that give me a chance to feel a feedback, get my body a chance to learn in a feedback loop in ways that give the same way that as an infant, I had to learn how to move my fingers. I couldn't move my fingers at first. Like none of us could. You can watch this with children where they're going, whoa, I've got an elbow. Of course they can't talk, but you can watch it in their eyes. And then when they get the fingers, right, they're getting this feedback loop of how to extend will into reality. And it's immensely embodied. I don't have that with the homeless problem. I don't have that with the meta crisis. The meta crisis is so many layers of abstraction that the only thing I have for that is a word attached to a bunch of models. So the only place I see that relevance can touch truth is in the now, and in my capacity to develop my sensory abilities to extend into the world. So not just focus on more local causes, because those can still be mentally fragmented. There's a local homeless problem in my hometown. I still can't do anything about that. But I can do something about where I am coming from when I am speaking. And I can feel how that relates to things like when I'm talking to people about the homeless problem, does the model become something I can feel? And does that feeling interact with reality in a way that my body can tell is true?
can I ask a quick follow-up? So the reason I asked that question is pretty deeply personal. You know, similarly to you, spent a long time in my life focused on these huge systemic problems, and I guess the only way that I know to relate to doing good in the world is from an embodied place, like you're speaking of. And yet, when I try to process things like the meta crisis, it seems to just be a sea of noise, or like a dream or something like that, and that it doesn't have that embodied feeling of realness. You know, it's like a language game that we're playing with each other, and getting status points by talking about the meta crisis or something like that. And so I have a sort of visceral reaction against that, and am more interested in working on very local things, because I may not be able to affect the homeless problem in my local area, but I can like help particular homeless people, and I can feel my way into doing that, right? And that feels like it's doing a non-zero amount of good in the world. And so I'm wondering, do you think like, so for me, I'm wondering, do you think I've overcorrected to more local scale in that sense, because it's what I know how to feel and sense into? And if so, or I see you shaking your head, but like, what are your thoughts on developing the ability to, in an embodied way, more accurately sense into like a larger field of awareness, so to make things local, so to speak, right? By extending what we can actually feel as embodied truth, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the short version is, I think you're not overcorrecting. In fact, I think you might be undercorrecting. Okay. The impression that what we are seeing in the world, this is something that it might make sense for me to go into in a future session. The impression that what we are seeing as the meta crisis, which I should rather phrase as the thing that we are able to create a mental model of that keeps mapping to things that we're naming as the meta crisis and pretending that we're talking about the same thing, even though it's a bunch of private hallucinations. Okay. So that thing that we're seeing out in the world, the impression that we can do something about it given this abstract way of being, is the generator. That is what is creating all of these problems. Okay. The sense of, well, let me zoom in on more local causes. Maybe I can, like, one thing that I can do is go work at the local soup kitchen. Well, maybe not now because everyone's freaking out about COVID, but that's at least an actionable thing I could imagine doing with my body, and I can feel the interface that has with the world, and I can see the impacts and get the feedback loops that I need in order to feel that effect in the world. The problem still isn't zoomed in enough, because at that point, yes, you're getting the feedback loops, that's helping. But why are you doing that? What are you trying to fix? What about the world gives you the impression that there is something that you need to fix? Oh, well, because there's this global problem and I'm trying to learn how to feel into it. Yeah, but where's your evidence that there is a global problem? I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm pointing out that there's a loopiness in where the choice point for making action in the first place is coming from. If you are coming from this kind of mental induction of an anxiety in the body that I need to do something to help the world, then you're already living in a hallucination. The point of work, the actual point of dissolving the structures that creates this thing that we keep, like when we model things, we go, well, as far as we can tell, these models are correct, but it's still disembodied. The cause of the thing that seems to be true is actually internal to each person's psyche. Where am I coming from? What is my drive? Why do I need to rescue the world? Now, when you address that, you may find yourself out of compassion wanting to do things in the world that are helpful for others. But if the reason you're doing it is because you have this mental model that doing good is the right thing to do, and then you use the same should mechanism that you do for your emails to get yourself to go do things that you think will give you the right kind of feedback, so you can take the models, in the mental models, in this session and then apply those in order to extend your senses, you're ignoring the causal force, the causal origin of where all of this is coming from, which is understandable. This is part of getting the feedback loop. But so I would say you actually need to go even more local to trace the experience in the body that creates the motive energy. When that is clear and that is grounded in the present moment, and you are deciding to do things from a place of clear choice and a sense of the ease and safety in the body, I suspect that you will be in touch with the clarity that makes what I'm saying extremely transparent. So that's my impression. And it's possible that you're already doing pieces of this. I want to underline something of, I'm sharing some mental models fairly quickly. All of this is something that if you ground in the truth of your lived experience, you will see for yourself, because your body is embedded in reality. So if you're connected to your body and you're touching reality, you will get the feedback loops you need to attune your mental models to truth. That's far more important than believing me or being convinced by what I say. Everything I have to say is about pointing you back at your truth. And or rather, not just your truth, pointing at the truth, which you access through looking.
Do you have time for one more question, Michael? I'd like to sneak one in.
Yeah.
So first, I really, really liked the session. And I'm having an embodiment coach right now. And I thought my embodiment game was pretty tight, but like I realized I have a lot of work to do in engaging in that work. And it's just almost a different state when I'm reasoning from an embodied place versus when I'm not. And I feel there's like a mechanism right here that wants to make sense of things. And I get out and I can feel it. And I never really thought about it. It makes a lot of sense though, connecting kind of the meta crisis, how wanting to be deployed from it is just a disembodiment function for a lot of people. And so I want to talk about Extinction Rebellion for a moment, because when I was hosted sessions in person in Toronto, they came and had a session, and it was like an hour of how much the world is fucked, like how it was so demoralizing. We just felt it in our body, and it was actually conscious that they did it. This is, yeah, okay, we have grieving circles now, and then then they deploy you to get arrested or something like that, and then the activist realm. And I thought about that. I'm like, okay, interesting. They freak you out, and then they kind of give you some mental models and some actions to get arrested or whatever. And I'm curious if that same thing could happen towards being embodiment instead of like getting arrested on the street. So it's like kind of having that fear of the meta crisis or existential risks as a rite of passage towards becoming collectively embodied. Sort of like what happened to you. It seems like this is sort of like a kind of like an unconscious, or just you stumble towards a rite of passage towards becoming more bodied through this path. So do you think that the meta crisis and being aware of all these existential risks and sort of like the complexity that we cannot grok with calculative reasoning sort of as a forcing function towards becoming more embodied, or can be repurposed towards that?
I like that last rephrasing, can be repurposed towards that. Yeah. So I think so. There's this concept from that shows up in yoga philosophy, the union of Shiva and Shakti. And where like Shakti is coming from below, Shiva is coming from above, and in the union is where all of the power is. And Shakti actually has all of the power and juice, like the earthy force from below. But Shiva is providing something like the perspective, the consciousness, and the holding of the container. It seems like getting both of those is important. And one of the main criticisms like a number of people have for what's going on with Western culture is that it's really Shiva heavy, hyper Shiva heavy. And in part, this is a matter of a correction. But this isn't to say, oh, let's remove Shiva and just do Shakti. Well, like animals do a great job. That's how we got here. So the business of using the mind, using sort of this Shiva vision to be able to see what is possible, stimulating something like, oh, we got to wake up. I could think that that is possible. The problem is something like, how to, there is no problem so bad it is worth sacrificing your sanity for. The fact that we're looking at the fact that we're looking at this model of all these existential risks and all of these different crises, and that they all converge into kind of this meta crisis, and we have a meaning crisis, and we have, I think, all of this political fragmentation and so on, and painting all of that, the way that that freaks out the body is a reflection. It is a direct reflection of the way in which the way of thinking about that is out of touch with truth. Because the body's reactions to those thoughts are out of touch with the physical environment your body is in. Okay. So noticing that, one of the big effects this is highlighting is the way in which the way of thinking about these things is itself distorted from the picture. If we had a fully embodied, clear-minded species, the embedding in physical reality would give us a very clear way of looking around and going, oh, we have a problem. We can feel it and we can see it. And we can help one another to continue to embody farther and farther into the abstract realms of Shiva. And to understand, which, like, literally to stand under, to embody, to have our feet on the ground and to wear this on our shoulders and to feel the weight of it. But even then, the relationship to it is not one of panicking about a possible future scenario. It is a lived experience of, what does this mean about right now? And about my relationship to right now. There is no reason to panic so badly that you lose your mind's ability to relate to your body. So I think that it can be sort of a rite of passage, but if you, the reason it's showing up as so frightening is because of the mechanism to leave the body's overcharge and live in mental worlds. And we're just finding more and more dramatic mental worlds to freak ourselves out with. That is the mechanism that is creating the problem. So any attempt to solve that problem, even if it's an attempt that is based on, oh, well, let me just ground in the moment so that I can be a proper contributor to a good world in the face of the meta crisis. Right? Well, then the reason for embodying is a mental one based on believing in this fantasy. What happens when that fantasy starts breaking down? Do you stop embodying then? At which point it becomes unstable and you go into another hallucination. The choice to be here, like you can notice that it's important by encountering these paradoxes. This is one place where I think that, as abstract as it can come across, embodying an understanding of Gödel's incompleteness theorem as lived, as applied, is actually a very powerful act of mental magic. It helps you to use the embodiment to break out of these mental clusters and come back to the body. That's its own thing. But if you do something where your reason for embodying is coming from these hallucinations, it's very unstable. It can bring you to noticing that it's important, and then you set aside the mind and remember who you are. And that grounding in the body gives you more power to be who you are and to live this life the way you want. When that becomes the motive, then it's possible to orient to stuff like the meaning crisis in a way that isn't sanity abandoning.
Yeah, I love it. I got so many threads coming up about, like, meta crisis is a noble lie. I'll save that. Because we have to close out. We have another session at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So Michael, any closing thoughts before we close out?
Two things arise for me. Three. Okay, I think I have three things I want to close on. The first is a pragmatic question to you, Peter. If I later put together something on letter.wiki, how do these participants, if they want to, find out about it?
I can announce it on the mailing list. I think everyone here is on the mailing list, so that's an easy way. I can also email everyone who RSVP to this event that letter as well.
Okay.
Or
cool.
You can source them in a different way, like just put your email down or whatever and save the chat.
Okay, let's do the announcement thing, because then people can be responsible for signing up for the mailing list and having been registered. Cool. Okay. The second thing is, so part of the reason I want to check in with that is because I want to feel a little bit of the impact this has had on y'all. I know I'm only going to get a little bit of a sample. I can see a little bit because there's a handful of about 10 people who are showing their faces. So I can see you and I can feel you, and I'm sort of wearing some of that energy. And this is helping to inform me what the future sessions are going to be like. But if we can have a little bit of interaction with that, that'll give me a little more information, a little more lived information. And that tells me what kind of session to continue on this thread is going to be useful. There are more ideas and theories I can present, but in a way that I hope is unsurprising, I am vastly more interested in grounding in the now and using that to orient to the mind than I am with filling the mind with theories. So with that said, depending on what I feel and sense, it might make sense to bring in a little bit of mind wizardry, like feeling into the application of the Gödel loopholes. You don't have to know the math, but you do have to feel it. And it's actually not as complicated as it sounds, but the mind hates it. The mind goes Shazbot when it encounters this stuff. So there's a game there, and I'm going to feel into that. So to make that brief, I don't know what next week is going to be, but it might be something with Gödel, and it might be something having to do with the business that I ended it with about you dare not succeed. Like, there's actually a lot of depth to that is worth understanding and feeling where the poison comes from. Okay. The third thing is, I want to invite you all to again notice what your body is doing right now. Okay. And in particular, I know that in a session like this, my temptation would be to go, oh, there's this idea and this idea, and there's like this important thing, and I think this was the main message, and I'm gonna like review this, and how can I apply this? I want you to notice that's the mind. If your mind is doing that too, if your mind does that like mine does, notice that that's the mind. If you don't remember anything about this session, that's okay. Right? Because the remembering is not where skill is. Skill is not in explicit memory. Skill is in the lived experience of doing and interacting with truth, interacting with reality. So my invitation of look down rather than looking up. Look down into a question for yourself. What of this do you want to live more? And how can you do so? That is a lived question that you can hold. You may not know an answer. You may not get an answer that your mind understands, but your body may sense something clear. And that sense may itself inspire you to do something a little bit different later, even without a thought that's necessarily attached. It's fine. Okay? That's actually more core to this kind of work than is understanding and remembering theory. Okay? So feel into your body, what of this do I want to live more? And how can I do so? And that's it.
Cool. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment. But Michael, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa and doing this session. I sense a lot of potential with this one. I'm quite excited about it. And an idea just emerged too from just seeing how you conducted yourself in this session. I think it would be good to have like embodiment checks throughout like Stoa sessions, whether there's informal in the chat, like it's like a culture emerges, like embodiment check and everyone just does it, or like we pause and do it. And I'm having a lot of, I'm going to have events on Clubhouse, so that'd be good to have there too. Like just embed that in the culture. Like, okay, time for an embodiment check. So much, this galaxy brain stuff. Everyone gets disembodied with all these thinking, so it's good to have these things. So I'm definitely going to implement that. So thank you for implanting that idea. And another thing I wanted to announce before we close out is this is a 3-part session, as Michael said, and it's going to end on the 15th, and then on the March 16th. We're having a symposium on the meta crisis. It just kind of worked out that way. And I was going to call it like, let us make the meta crisis our superordinate goal. But then I might change my mind of the series. So maybe there's a question mark I put on it or something. But we have cool people. We have Thomas Monahan from X-Risk, this book, How Humanity Discovered Its Own Extinction. He's coming in. We have Phil Torres, who wrote this book, Morality, Foresight, Human Flourishing, Introduction to Existential Risk. We have people from the Lifeboat Foundation, Jonathan Rosen from Perspectiva. So a bunch of people are going to come in and talk about this. And Mike, maybe you can come in and we can do some kind of sense-making session at the end of that. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah, I'll take a look at my schedule, but that sounds fun.
I think you're the only man who says meta crisis symposium. Well, next to me and then everyone else in the Stoa would think that's fun. All right, everyone. So in about 10 minutes, Ali from Rebel Wisdom is coming in to doing a psychedelic sense making, which seems fitting to follow this. Again, just happenstance. So you can RSVP on the Stoa website. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to Stoa today.
Thank you.